Okay, folks, welcome. Um, when you get to the kind of the end of a course where most of the work is now kind of out there with you, um, it makes it, when you do one of these sessions, it's kind of like I'm not really sure what the odds are of people showing up. And two, particularly if it happens to be the last session face to face we'll have. So either way, this is good turnout. Yeah. Uh, only a couple things that we're going to spend a little time with, and probably not an hour, or not more than an hour in terms of content. But the notion is to look at kind of where we are project wise, my impressions as I've looked at some of the project categories, things like that. And then two, I want to get into a bit of a discussion about notions of opportunity gap and kind of get you know comments from you about what you observed or what you found as you work through your school or whatever you're pulling apart. And so because I think there are obviously some things that we could give you really deep pile of wonderful bits and pieces of research and things like that, or we could give you, four or five little snippet film cuts to talk about, opportunity gaps. And I guess at some point in time, people decided the little video snippets are about all we need to talk about that. But anyhow, we need to talk about that. And so those are the two main ingredients there. Then we kind of, for the last couple of sessions here, next week, and then that would be the end. Anyhow, we are not going to meet. I will be available. Well, let's put it this way. I'll try to be available during that time frame if you want to reach out and discuss something or whatever. Or you can certainly, send me an email and we'll arrange something. But just be aware that the time frame is falling upon us, and next week we won't meet. Now I know there are some smiles there, so feel free. The first thing having to do with projects and assignment, I'm assuming you felt a little bit at ease when I sent out a little notice earlier about the last assignment that was hanging out there on April 30th. And if you'll notice, that was done kind of on purpose because I had not ever put that one up or turned it on, rather, and was debating whether to even work on that one or not, because it doesn't seem like it's necessarily germane to what this course is about. A little bit more of the technical side, and a little bit more of the notions of school cultures and things like that, as opposed to what are the 6 basic leadership models and what are the okay. Call me well, just a little critic there, but if I had to take stuff off the list, that'd be the first thing I'd take off. So that's gone, so be aware of that. I have looked at group projects from both sections. I'm going back through them now to make express the comments that I kind of jotted down earlier. The general sense is that I don't see much there that's going to require any sort of dramatic rewrite or anything like that. I think there might be, a few little edit things, or maybe a section that you just kind of blew by, stuff like that shows up sometimes. And but the content elements and the amount of research that had been done to pull those content elements together, those things look pretty good. So I don't know that that's going to be much of an issue for you. Maybe not at all. I don't know. Once I get into the comment pieces, I may just say, if you want to do this, I'd do this or whatever, but that'd be about it. Okay. All right. Any other, comments or questions about assignment pieces? I am working through all of that primarily this week, and so it'll pop up there. But as I said, I don't imagine it'll be any big changes or any real changes that most of you will have to make. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Now, the school improvement plan may be a bit more of an issue, and so I'm going to try to burn through those by the weekend so that you have feedback on those, since that's one of the capstone projects, and so we can then do something to create a final version, or we'll figure all that out. But that one's not too far off schedule, but the other one, the first one, obviously wasn't. As I said, I don't know about those. I've just randomly kind of brushed through some of them just to, when they popped up on my screen that they were available, I'd open them up just to take a quick look and see what was what. But the general sense of those, I think, was pretty straightforward. And so I'm thinking from what I've seen so far, most of you didn't get overly elaborate with things. And so, it's, I don't know that there are going to be many issues that surface in there too much, except maybe some generic stuff that shows up with everybody. And then I'll just make a comment through a message to everyone, because generally the way that you adapt to some sort of new thought process or structured thought process, like this sort of empirical thing we've had you going through, it feels after a while sort of intuitive, and you wonder where the process occurs, but it's actually based on some pretty good notions about how to operate in these virtual environments that we're beginning to get a little bit better hand on through the research. So yeah, that one I'll try as hard as I can to get it done by the first of the week. But there's 3 classes of you, and 2 of this class, and then 1 of a doctoral research class, and so a lot of pages have to be read here all of a sudden, because I believe all the good stuff comes together at the end and not necessarily throughout the course. That once you get all this stuff together, then the end product is what you look for. And hopefully that's been somewhat useful in the circumstances that some of you have been this semester, but we'll see how that plays out. So any thoughts or questions about kind of where we are and with the projects and that sort of stuff? I mean, you can ask later, but I just wondered if there are any right at this moment.
Dr. Bode, I had a quick question, and I'll try to be brief here. And in our group, there were a couple members of my group, and we had this conversation back and forth. I know the capstone project was individual, but in looking at my school improvement plan individually, it was very lacking in a lot of regards. And so the way that I took the project was try to add suggestive action, and then try to create an action plan to address those deficits that occurred within the school, or that are occurring within the school. Is that somewhat close to what we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, there are several different directions this puppy could go toward. One is that where you're right in the middle of a change of some sort, or not having really had a plan before of how to approach this, and so there's going to be some always lost time and learning term up front to get to kind of where it begins to function on an ongoing basis, year to year. And it's inevitably going to take a little bit of work up front. It always does. And you shoot for the, things to start to come together in the second year and begin to, process along pretty well in the third year. But the problem is that's assuming that nobody leaves the school or there's no turnover, all that sort of stuff. So it's a little hard to predict that. But yeah, there are many different paths there. It's like the, multiple algorithms in math. There's just many ways, different ways to get there. You can do estimation, you can do other kind of processes to get there. So it's, it's not, I know we've kind of taught you all along to think that the process is more important than the product, but when you're doing evaluation work, actually the process is a given. The only thing that matters is the product, because you're typically talking about, big dollars, and what do we, is this gonna, what's the cost benefit analysis of this thing, and is it worth keeping it, or is it costing us too much to run it? And you would like to think that school decisions are made purely on the welfare of the children, but no, they're also made on the amount of money that's in the checkbook. And so, I mean, you have to always have that in the back of your mind. So it is this is important to get the product. Now, the product has to be true, obviously, but you're not really as entrenched in the process as you are the product, because the product is what really matters. That's where, the rubber meets the road, as they would say in North Carolina. So any questions, any other questions? Or I hope that helped, Sam. I mean, I'm expecting to see, and from what I kind of randomly shuffled, now that was 4 or 5 papers. I think there's going to be a wide variety here of approaches to doing the school improvement, and particularly doing the evaluation elements of it, the assessment and evaluation elements of it. But it's you learn at some point, it becomes kind of secondhand, and that when you get into something, this is what you're going to have to do if you want to keep it or make it possible to run, all that sort of stuff. So it is I hate to say it, but it is an area in which the product is really the compelling piece that you get out of it. That's where you tell the story, and you have to have good data to get there. But many a good idea has been sold on telling the story before the data filled in behind it. And so just be aware that evaluation is not purely just data collection. It's also kind of understanding what's important, and what little things, nuances maybe that you want to put in the mix, just because they probably have an impact or something like that. Am I wandering, rambling? Probably, but that's a favorite subject of mine, one on which I do a little bit of research on. So it's kind of interesting what you find out as you dig deeper into it. All right, let's talk about opportunity gaps then. What was the kind of major thing that you saw when you looked at your school, or the school that you're building this project around, and what were the opportunity gaps? What was something compelling, or something unexpected, or something expected? I mean, what was it that you saw when you were looking for opportunity gaps? I'm going to start spinning a big wheel here in a minute, and we'll just kind of see where it lands. No, I'm kidding. I can't do that. It would be a nice feature to add to this, though. You just kind of put a little big wheel graphic up there and then spin it, and whoever you come up on, that's who has to comment. So feel free. Nobody's done more stupid things this week than me. So
I'll go. One thing that our school talked about, I've met with my principal and we kind of discussed what the biggest impacts were after looking at the North Carolina report card, teacher working conditions survey. Economically disadvantaged students are pretty much our largest opportunity gap, because over, I think it was 46% was their proficiency. So it wasn't very high for them. And just given resources from Wilkes County, we're given hardly no resources. We're in a very low area, so we don't have available resources from parents or the community. So I just think not giving them what they need, like as far as other schools in the state, is definitely holding them back. And another thing we talked about is mental health and having people aware of that. So.
Mhm. Okay. Someone else?
I saw like within my school that we have we have a very low number of Black students, but those students are some of our lower students. But since they are not like enough to make a subgroup, it's almost like they're not focused on. So it was like the groups that were going to show us growth and show, make our numbers are where we focused on, but those other kids are falling through the cracks because there's not very many of them. That's what I noticed from our.
Yeah, and if you know from a technical perspective, it's important to understand why, but from a technical perspective, you can never be more than 95% sure about anything, even with ironclad evidence. And so you figure, the kids that are kind of out on the ends, they're not in that representative middle group. And so if they're too far above the scheme or too far below the scheme, they don't really matter. Plus, that if you have less than 5 or 6, 7, something like that, subjects, then anything you might do with that is meaningless. I mean, it's all random chance at that point. And so you kind of have to think about it as a two-step process. I mean, when you build, and I know some of these subcategories, there's no subjectivity at all to it, but I know some you have a little bit. But when you have these subcategories that are below a certain end, and they leave them off, because they know they can't analyze that, and not because it doesn't tell you a story or tell you a tale. So I think as much as possible, if you have groups like that, you should try to understand kind of their story too, because it may be that we're constantly pitting needs against each other, like it's some business enterprise, and so you're forced to make decisions. And by you, I mean you, because you'll be the next ones that'll have to make those decisions. You're forced to make a decision between, what's a really, really good experimental thing, or what's a really, really decent, safe thing. Because the money, the safe thing, cheap, experimental thing, too much money. And so it is you always keep in mind that in that leadership role, that leadership function, you always have to have to understand what is the point that you serve the most amount of students, realizing that there's probably a chance that you're not serving all students. And sometimes that grates the sort of the moral boundaries, ethical moral boundaries that people like to operate within. But it's like deciding. It's the classic example that comes out of Greek prose and things like that, where you have the two equally bad outcomes poised against each other, and you can only solve one, either because of time or distance or whatever. But you know, you're always have these different outcomes. You know, one that's equal, both of them damaging, but it's a matter of, okay, which one of those damages can we live with, or you know, can we afford, or which one can we not do? We absolutely can't afford to do that, so we'll fix this problem over here, and we'll just kind of tamp this one down as best we can, see if there's something else that it fits into. And you'll have to make that decision, you know, time after time, year after year, things like that. But it's, you know, you have to be humane, but at the same time analytical. And, you know, that's the basic debate. Can you be humane and analytical at the same time? All right. Now, I'm sorry, I got really bummer there deep down or whatever, but, you know. Next up. Come on, folks, I'm 70 years old. I don't have a whole lot of time left to wait on you. Just, yeah, say something. You know, in a couple of years, you're going to be the voice of total authority when that comes over the school intercom. And you're going to have to, you know, be a little bit projected, might I say, because, you know, I've always heard that if you're compellingly shy, you know, compensate, don't let them know that. So because if they do, they'll, you know, the horde will attack you and whatever, you know, but, you know, you will be the voice of authority on the intercom. So let's talk.
I mentioned this. I drew some comparisons between our opportunity gaps paper and our equity traps paper that we did for our other class. I don't know if anyone else was thinking the same thing as they were writing it, but I touched on some of the similar things that I mentioned in that paper at my school. And I know I mentioned this in our other class, but at our school, our students are divided on teams according to their academic ability. So all of the gifted kids are on one team, and then all the EC students are on the other team. And my school has a lot of minority students, but it borders, it's Clemens Middle School, but it has a Winston-Salem address. So we have half kids from Clemens and half from Winston. So it's very diverse. But what happens is a lot of the minority students wind up on one team, and a lot of the white kids wind up on the other. And I was looking at the numbers of students that are actually in AG classes, and there's just not enough minority representation in the higher level classes. So that was what I focused on for a big part of my opportunity gaps paper.
Yeah, and that, well, it's the same thing. I mean, it is essentially the same question in a slightly different way. But the, you know, the opportunity gap component, and the one that I kind of want to get a few more stories before I kind of make a summary here of some things. But yeah, these gaps they're there. And if you begin to think about the underlying element under all of these gaps, the one underlying thing that's at the bottom of the pyramid for all these gaps, it's primarily income. It's the economic you know, inequity between folks that are up here and a whole bunch of folks that are down here. And that's basically the, you know, the issue with our chaos over the last, I'd say decade or so, is that we do have this gap that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the, you know, the pandemic even made it bigger. And so you have a whole bunch of people that want something better, you have a handful of people that want to have the most money they can ever have. Acquisition is the important thing, not what how deep the pot is. But you know, there's a contrast there. There's a continuing contrast. And now it just so happens that economic disparity also plays itself out in terms of racial disparities, immigrant status disparities, you know, all these different areas where there are disparities. It all plays itself out in terms of economics. And so you know, if you have 50% of the tax base in a small town or a small county, you have at least 50% of the influence. But if you make enough to get by and that's about it, and you're at a school where everybody makes just enough to get by and it's not it, you know, they don't pay the big taxes. It's big relative to their income, but they don't pay the big taxes, but they get to, benefit from a few services, but the other group, the group up top, realizes that, you know, in order to make money, you have to invest money. And so they're willing to pay a little bit tax. They don't want to pay too much, but they're willing to pay a little bit because it expands their influence within the community when they're providing half the tax base to begin with. So there is an economic component to it from a sociological perspective, Toto. But yeah, I think as we play these things through, you're going to find that most of them have at their core, at the very bottom layer, is that economic inequity. Now, things may build on top. Obviously, race builds right on top. Immigrant status builds right on top. So lots of things build on top of that. But the floor at the bottom is always an economic debate, an economic inequity. And so all these opportunity gaps have an economic component to them. And you know, what else gets layered on top? You know, that's another thing. You know, not only are they poor, but they're also Black. Not only are they poor, but they're also immigrant. And so you get, you know, you get this kind of contortion between, or convolution between, you know, why people are really in that group and, you know, their ability not to be in that group, their ability to advance. So it's, you know, don't kid yourself. There is an economic component there. All right, another story. Come on, somebody fall on the sword.
I see it at my school in discipline. Our school is mostly white female teachers, and a lot of them are very experienced. Honestly, they're very close to retirement age. A lot of our school is at this point. And I just think that sometimes it has to do with them not understanding the kids' cultures, understanding where they're coming from. So I see that a lot at school as far as discipline goes.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's that cultural component, and you know, to a certain extent, it's still underlayered. You still have economic diversity underneath there. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting legal thing that you're dealing with there too, which is you know, can you require somebody to completely become trained in a different way than they originally were when you hired them? And the answer is yes, but the requirement for that to be there is that you have to have a staff development model that incorporates them. And if you don't, then, you know, it's kind of a meaningless thing. If you don't provide that, you can't really require them to change. Still by law, you can't require them to do something completely different. If, you know, if you don't have a way of getting them there, if you don't have a way of training them. So a lot of that becomes, you know, kind of a training component to the model too, a staff development training component, because you know, the first time, I imagine the first time you had your diversity training sessions, you were kind of going, what? You know, why is it? You know, you went through all of that because you were dealing with cultures that were quite different from yours, and they were dealing with cultures that were quite different from theirs. And so you have to get, you know, you have to kind of work through the development, work through the training, the staff development. That's how you make change. And you know, I think it's a little bit, how do I say this? Silly for a you know, central school administration model to have, unless every school they've got's got that many people coming up for retirement, you have to at some point consider the rotation of staff. And honestly, I know nobody likes that, but it really does revitalize the schools to a certain extent. Or, and here's another important thing it does, it might cause those people that are at the end of the vine, you know, to go ahead and, you know, cut the stem, because they don't want necessarily to have to, you know, go to a different place and do a different thing. And so it is a, you know, it serves multiple purposes to kind of try to do things that way. But yeah, there are some issues that are purely staff development. I mean, you can't do anything else until you do that first. And you know, that's kind of difficult, but it can be done. One more, just give me one more. Just somebody that hadn't spoke up whole semester. Yeah, okay, Vanessa.
This is something that came up this week and is not necessarily about my school. But I work in an elementary school, and my school is predominantly Hispanic. Most of our population, their parents speak Spanish. We have a lot of staff members and ESL teachers who, you know, make sure that our parents know about the opportunities afforded to their child in Spanish. Anyway, so this week, my son is in 8th grade, and my school feeds into his middle school.
Mm-hmm.
So he messaged me at work and said, Mom, I'm needing to fill out my 8th grade registration. And on there was signing up for the ability to take high school classes in 8th grade. And so my question to him was, why are you filling this out at school? You know, why are they not allowing you to bring this home and discuss it with parents? So anyway, upon some further digging, this is normal. And most kids in his class went ahead and filled it out at school, you know, so parents were not involved in any kind of decision-making at all. You're completely cutting parents out of it. And then what about those students who have Spanish-speaking parents who are not even aware of the opportunities that could be afforded to their child? So it's kind of creating some opportunity gaps, because, you know, only those kids who, dare I say, have educated parents and know the process of these things and how it can give you a leg up to take these high school courses in 8th grade. You know what I mean? Like if your parents are not made aware of the benefits of that, or even that is an option, it's not fair.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Last night, class, I mean, you're in a master's program together. They're all, you know, a year ahead of you in terms of they've got an administrative job, or they're headed into one or whatever, and they're, you know, they're adding on to existing master's degrees and things like that. So anyhow, we got into a really long discussion about that because, you know, when you think about it, you know, kids whose are kids whose parents can afford to stay home, not stay home because they don't have a job, but can afford to stay home or work from home, they have a distinct advantage over kids that their parents have to work 2 and 3 jobs, all categorized essential to get by, or the kid has to help a little bit to get by, worked in the restaurant, working whatever. And so, you've got, kind of that categorization thing that begins to happen once again. And if you're not careful, you discover that you sort of do the whole sedimentary thing again, and the same people end up in the same place every time, no matter what label you put on them. And so you have to be careful in terms of figuring out how much can you expect out of certain kids. And one of them had a case, one of the students who's an assistant principal at a high school had a case where a student that was supposed to be receiving, some consideration, some services, but he had a teacher that was in the quote unquote advanced level of science or math, I forget which one it was. And they were using a very high standard, extremely high standard. In other words, they had gone beyond, the normal standard. And the way it played out, homework was graded, it was math. Homework was graded for accuracy and, all those writing elements, and not how, these different math pieces fit together. And there were 2 math teachers that taught that advanced math. And the second one, who had a much longer tenure, he said, no, you can't do that. You can't grade these things for accuracy, because, we have to figure out first, before we turn them into wonderful cursive writers, we have to figure out, do they know how these 2 ideas fit together? And we can come back to that. We don't have to fix all those things right now. It's just as important to know how these things work together as it is to be able to write a really well grammatically put together explanation of that. And so they went to the principal to sort that out. Obviously there were some parent complaints and things like that. And when it came back, the more senior faculty member was, she kind of won, and the principal, told the other junior faculty member to, stop grading for accuracy, because they didn't need to know that. And the minute that they did that, then the next round the scores jumped up. And what they had discovered was that, the content recognition and cognitive development of these kids didn't really change. It was how accurate. What changed was that, it really didn't matter how well these descriptions were put together when you were focused on content. That it was almost like evaluating the wrong thing. And you may have a moral objection to that and say, well, if they can't write, I don't want to deal with it. Well, lots of great people in the world couldn't write. And from, say, the 300s or 400s AD until the 1400s, a millennium, less than 1% of the population could read or write in Europe. And those are our ancestors. So, we have a way of figuring things out, but obviously we'd like to have a much greater, literacy. But, back, during the time, during the Dark Ages, it truly was dark, because there were not many people that were literate in Europe. And most of them were monks and church members, or priests rather. And so everybody was a church member. But, that sort of notion that being accurate was more important than any content element you know, that's a big time opportunity gap into itself. Just think of that. It's an opportunity gap to try to be quote unquote more rigorous, because some people see more rigorous as more involved and more accurate and more to the guidelines. I'm not sure that would be my definition of rigor, but you know, some people have that definition. And so just because the class is tougher and it has a really, you know, 100 item multiple choice test, you know, that's meaningless. What is rigor is the notion of getting kids to challenge themselves and to learn for the purpose of learning, and not because they just need to get out of here and get home. But, you know, I'm old, so I can dream the dream. What else did you see?
So in looking at my school's data, the biggest opportunity gap is, well, one of the biggest is with our students with disabilities. And that's interesting because our school is the designated behavior school. So kids are bussed in with behavior and emotional disorders like ODD, ADHD. I mean, we're that school specifically for those children, and essentially we are failing at serving them. There's a big, huge gap between them and their peers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why do you think that gap occurs?
I mean, they've made the most growth. I mean, they've made a lot of growth, but they are still receiving a failing grade in terms of their proficiency scores.
Right. Okay.
But I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I couldn't pinpoint just one. But I do feel like a lot of that has to do with the fact that we spend a lot of the time getting their emotions under control before we can instruct them. Because I mean, our school is the designated behavior. We have kids coming out of district just to our school. Mm-hmm. So for whatever reason, we were chosen for that. But right now it's like, we're doing them a disservice essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my first teaching job, was in at that time it was called a pre-vocational school. And I think I had morning and afternoon groups, and they were both about 17, 18 kids. And they were all on probation with the school division. And these were middle school age kids. These were, you know, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids. And I think about 80% of them were on probation with the court system. And so we were supposed to, you know, keep these kids in school and get them turned around, and, you know, see if there are programs for them to work with. And, you know, I was doing, you know, some basic, you know, technical, filling out forms, filling out applications, you know, stuff like that, because we you know, we wanted them to have a little bit of practical skill at trying to get a job if they decide to, you know, drop out and don't end up in jail. You know, eventually they may want to work or may want to try to work. And so it was you know, it was a tough school. Yeah, it's a tough school like that. Yeah, there's I hate keeping to, you know, bring up what you may consider to be just my personal crusades, but you know, the thing that we have done in schools is we've standardized schools. I mean, good thing, right? Standardized schools. But what we've done is we've also standardized content. We've standardized what can be done in a certain time frame, and whether it fits the material being taught or whatever. And so we tend to think when our little, you know, 50-minute boxes or 120-minute boxes or whatever the boxes size and shape there are these days. But the one thing we know about learning is that learning is always occurring. I mean, they may not learn the thing you want them to learn, but they're always occurring. Learning is always happening from the moment you're alive, whatever your perception of that is, until the moment you cease to be alive, once again, whatever your perception of that is, in which your mind is not learning. Now, it doesn't necessarily have, the filters aren't on all the time, and consider the dreams you have sometimes, in the dream of the high school boyfriend or girlfriend, that here it is 30 years later, and suddenly you're still dealing with those, but you're doing it 30 years out of time, and so the time's all wrong. That's the way the mind works when you're dreaming, or when you're have those moments of lighter sleep. But we are programmed to learn. We learn, and then we filter it. And that was, that's Piaget's whole notion, is that we filter it, and as we filter it, it either fits into what we already knew somewhere, we just maybe didn't have the right term for it or whatever, or it becomes something new. And we have to understand it enough to figure out where we're going to, file that thing. And so the mind is driven to do that. So we're always learning things, but what we equated learning things to, beginning about 125 years ago or whatever, was that it had to fit in a certain time frame, and we had to know whether it worked or not by a certain grading structure, no matter what the content was. And that was a model straight out of the, kind of the classic schools or the humanistic schools for rich young males during the 18th century. What in the world? Okay, Alexa's talking to me. I don't know why, but she broke my whole thing there. No, but it is, it is kind of, thought process that you have to engage into. But we're all assuming that it has to fit in a certain time frame, and it all has to be evaluated in a similar manner. And that's not related to learning or to different disciplines or to different types of activities. That's all purely related to, that was the cheapest and the most efficient way to organize this educational model. And then we could go from people going to high school, boom, right into college without any problem. And so the model was built around a collegiate model. And learning always occurs. The thing that we try to fit it into is a time element. And some of you might have been exposed to Montessori model schools. Well, the basic underlying notion of the Montessori school is that you'll have the same sorts of goals for learning, but you'll allow the student to have some ability to make decisions within the framework of what about is their kind of their entry point into understanding things, or entry point into learning things. But once you begin to learn things, then you could develop an enthusiasm for that. And so that, that's the kickstart. That's what you get with young kids. You get them so, caught up in stuff. But then almost immediately, then you have to try to help them comprehend all those things. So it's, this notion of particular timeframes, the way we schedule schools and model schools and structure schools really is just tied to that idea that we had to have, standard administration of particular kinds of instructions, and we had to have, standard ways of evaluating and assessing those. And we came up with that model 130 years ago. But it still sounds very familiar today. You may ask, what do you do about it? And my answer is, I don't know. In 5 or 6 or 7 years, you're in charge of things. So, figure it out, because it's not going away. And whichever parts of it we don't get settled out soon, we'll come back to haunt us later. That's what they all do. But don't be surprised that it is, it is a money gap. And that's where the structural elements of these issues come from, because it's all about the money. And when you're living in a community where you, in a smaller community where, say, you have 50% of your tax base is half a dozen industries, and the rest of your tax base is spread across, the citizens in the county or citizens in the city. It's a, the 50% tax base gets a bigger voice than the 50% of people in the system. And so it is all about the economics, and the systemic stuff comes from that disparity between who's paying the taxes and who's trying to crawl up the ladder of advancement and success. And so it's not designed to be sound like the Marxist revolts, but it's not a it's a pure economic thing. Right now we have so much money at the top and so little money at the bottom that everybody knows that will equalize. I mean, that's an economic principle, and so it will begin to equalize at some point. It's just how big is the disparity when that process becomes. I don't know that I'll be around to see the equalization, but I sure hope my granddaughter gets to experience it. But it will happen. That's basic economics. You can only ride the upside for so long, and eventually you get on the other side of the curve. But what can you do? You are the principal. You are the director. You are the supervisor of whatever. You are that person, and you have to figure out how can you best serve the most people possible against who do I leave out, or what program don't we do? And that's a tough one. That is a tough choice. But it's an inevitable one, because the disparity in education is always somewhat about the money. And I always encourage people to attack the one big thing, the one thing that you think is eating at the soul of that school or that culture, and go after that, and use your money wisely and see what happens. And if that's not it, then couldn't necessarily have hurt. Then you can attack something else the next year or whatever. But you have to marshal your resources. You can't parcel out everybody a little bit. That never really works. We say we got $2,000 for teacher entertainment fund, but the basic guidance is you can only apply for $25. And so for $25 a pop, you're not going to do much community outreach or entertainment or whatever. But if you went with larger capacity events, maybe even some partnership between schools, you then still have the ability, to have a bigger impact, as opposed to a few dollars here, a few dollars there, a few dollars there. But once again, that's economics 101. And so, these things work, so it will all come back. I'm sorry, I'm rambling, I'm deep, and I'm philosophical, and the problem is I have no earthly idea why. I have not had any pain meds today. I've not had anything to drink today except water. I'm on one of those days when you do a little fasting, you do a little, drink a little bit more and eat a little bit less. And that way you kind of don't gain weight every day of the year. But, the idea is that, if you're having a great time and you're kind of in the zone, that's good. But you ought to be there for a reason, and I'm not. I'm just kind of rambling. So, anything that you think is important to note in these notions of disparity? Yeah, opportunity gap is buzzword. Disparity, it's a truism. So you might as well call it what it is. I know that's not appropriate, but okay. But what have you seen that might fall across a broader category? You saw what you saw in school, but what are some of the things that I'm missing? There's a lot. So all the bold ones are done, huh? Okay. Well, I'm not going to beat it to death because that's just not what I do. But I do think as future leaders in buildings and systems and centers and things like that, be aware that there are a lot of tough decisions that you'll have to make that are have at their core an economic reality, but it doesn't mean that they don't just eat you to death. And so you can't, you have to forgive yourself on a regular basis, because if you don't, man, you're really going to go through a short career and, ulcers on high blood pressure and everything else, because, in somebody's book, you will have made a mistake every decision you make. And that's pretty common, across all layers of decision making. And so you just have to be able in reasonable time frame, to forgive yourself and say, okay, well, I served the best for what I could. I did the best with what was available, whatever language helps you. But you just got to be able to toss off that guilt pretty quickly, because the reality is that's what you're paid to do, is to be there and make those what seem like economic decisions, but always have faces in the background. And that may be the toughest test of leadership. It really may be. And realize sometimes you get it wrong. That's okay. Lots of people are in, as they say, lots of people are in the Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame, because they get hit the ball 3 times out of 10. Well, you don't get them all. You get a few, and so you move on. You got to be willing to move on, and not in terms of hard-hearted, but just in terms of being a realist and understanding the reality of where you are. And you're between the rock and the hard place, and somehow you have to navigate out of that. And somebody's always going to get damaged in it a little way. But that's, once again, that's reality. You have the opportunity to help the most people you can help and have the biggest impact you can have. And that's what you have. And, in reality, this pep talk is kind of always my final session in one of these courses, because it's kind of like, what can we tell you that will help in that last little bit, or that margin where you'll encounter something that you don't really have a good sense of, and you're not quite sure, where you want to go. Trust yourself, trust your intuition. All that good learning, all that, positive expert knowledge is subconscious. It's all down in there, and so, trust your intuition, trust your instincts on that a little bit, and more times than not, you'll be fine. But once again, you'll screw up every now and then, but forgive yourself. It passes. You get through a career in education, you haven't been sued once or twice, you're really not doing your job. And on that metric, I've been doing my job really well for a long time, but you know, never mind. I could recount for you some instances that, but it would drive you nuts, maybe even more nuts than today, but we'll save those. Questions, thoughts? You know, I'm burning through these things, and hopefully I'll get, you know, next day or two, I'll get them all done. And, you know, I doubt there'll be big changes. As I said, the group stuff looked okay. I think there will be some, you know, tinkering around the edges sort of thing, but nothing that's going to require a big rewrite, just to, you know, clean it up a little bit or something like that. I have not had the opportunity to read the school improvement papers yet. I scanned through 5 or 6 in each of the class sections to get more of a sense of what might be missing and what's, you know, kind of some or the resource that I need to provide you. And so you know, I'm trying to use that for that purpose, and I've made a bunch of notes, but now I need to go back through and, you know, read them one to one, so that I can give you, you know, some feedback, some consideration, some, you know, notions, helpful hints, things like that. You know, I realize that, you know, it may be, okay, here you are, and you didn't quite get that piece, but, you know, here's a good resource to go look at that. I mean, and not really, you know, you will have met the requirement, but if you're going to use that notion or that idea again, here are things you fix quickly. And I think that's the only fair way to do it, given, you know, kind of the COVID craziness that this semester and the ups and downs that we've kind of survived. But we're a little ecstatic. Our entire family, my wife and I, and both of our sons have been inoculated. So, and my daughter-in-law has been inoculated. So we are going to get together in May, and we haven't seen each other in a year and a half. So, and we are of Irish descent. So there could be a party in Boston, which is the perfect Irish place to do a party. And so, you know, we're all looking forward to that, but, you know, we got to get there first. And I know that in order for me to get there, I got to go through you. And so I need to get these things done so we can get this thing done and move on. The one thing that we attempted to do with the course, and I particularly attempted to do with my kind of take on the course, was to put the focus on you thinking about the circumstances in which you operate the school, your circumstances, and, you know, what might be ways of having an impact on that, on the you know, rougher parts of it. And so that, you know, that thought process is really what we've tried to engage you in. And the reason we want you to use specific real schools is because that's, you know, that makes it real to you. It's a better simulation if you do. And so, but we hope that you were also able to use some of the stuff in these projects to work that you're currently doing. And if we've done that and got you to kind of think through these couple of major projects that were big pieces, then, you know, we've done what we set out to do with the course, and maybe you won't be as bad off as you think you are when you walk into that job. But you know, my always sign off the last time we'll meet as a group is to thank you for your participation and congratulate you on having stuck with it and made it to this point. And you know, we'll see you around the bend probably, but you know, the feedback is coming. I just, yeah, I have to get the course out of the way first. If you have any need to talk with me, or if you have any questions, reach out. We'll do a one-on-one, we'll do a one-on-two, well, whatever, and we will, you know, we'll talk those things through. You know, it's not like I have to save all my money now so I can have a big party in Boston in May. So it's not like I'm going anywhere or doing anything. So, you know, we'll kind of sit on that. So I'll be here. Give me a yell. We'll set something up. Otherwise, once again, thank you for participating, and have a great next semester, and good night.